With the Pittsburgh Steelers still awaiting the phone call of a certain quarterback that is in hiding or in hibernation or vacation, whatever you want to refer to it as. The Pittsburgh Steelers are continuing to make splashes even after the NFL draft by making probably one of the most unorthodox but yet surprising, not so surprising moves. Want to find out what that move is and what it could mean for their future? Stay tuned to find out on Gridiron Gab Pro Style.
The autumn winds move like the thunderous waves of Neptune's sacred palace. And here, amongst the blackened soil, lies the ragged hands, worn, torn, and callous. They await with cunning and vicious prowess, for the warriors have returned.
Come on, Dutch! Don't do it! Woo! No way! Woo! 85! Crying out loud! You're making me, you're driving me nuts!
But behold.
Welcome back, you guys. Thank you all so much for joining us on another edition of Gridiron Gab Pro Style. Of course, you gabbing with the one and only Mr. CeeLo. And it's been a few weeks, you guys. The draft has come and gone. I am going to do a show following that up. There's everybody out there doing their thing. And I'm going to do my shows and kind of let you guys know who I feel is relevant and who had the best drafts. And I know everybody's going to be like, well, minicamp is coming up. Well, that's true. But before we get started, I just want to let you guys know, I hope you guys are safe and doing okay. And for all of you that are adults and have children, make sure you know where your children are, because this community was hit with a tragedy and it's going to affect 2 teenagers and a young man. So I just say, make sure all of you that are parents, make sure you keep an eye on your children and make sure that you stay safe wherever you go after dark. But with that being said, I also want you guys to make sure you stay safe out there. But let's get into it. As many of you know, or maybe you don't know, George Pickens, the star wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers, I guess you could say not star, but in my opinion, he was a star in the making. He just had a lot of issues. And many of you who know me, maybe I've mentioned this on my brother channel, Growlin' and Prowlin'. I love George Pickens, the player. I just can't stand George Pickens, the diva.
Bruh.
And honestly, I'll be straight up with you. I think the issue with George Pickens, he just needs somebody to straighten him out. He had problems at Georgia, but I mean, they weren't nearly as rampant as it seems like they've gotten here since he's been in the National Football League. But the Steelers traded him, and I think they got a third for next season or the year after. I think that's what they got out of it. But what does this say about the Steelers that they're willing to move forward? And then not even taking a quarterback in the draft this year. I believe, this is just me, I think the Steelers, and I know a lot of people are going to say I'm crazy because Mike Tomlin's never had a losing season. And I don't think that's going to change. But it's looking more like this is a Steelers team that is basically saying, we're going for Arch Manning.
What?
We're setting a table where everybody in the league knows that, hey, this is our guy, and that's what we're doing. Because ultimately, even if you bring Aaron Rodgers in here, you set and point go and get a guy who you let Najee Harris go. And I get it. I totally understand where you're coming from by drafting a running back, but the reality of it is this has been, and anybody that has watched my show and know what I believe, the Steelers have been playing around with this quarterback position for God knows how long, since Roethlisberger was in the last 2 seasons, and you saw he was on the decline. And the Steelers just kept playing around with it until the point They took a guy, which everybody said that draft class with Malik Willis and Kenny Pickett as well as Matt Corral, those guys were overrated. So the Steelers took Kenny Pickett with the 15th pick overall, if I recall correctly, in that draft, and it didn't turn out to be that. He didn't turn out to be that dude. So that is where I'm at when I look at a situation where you essentially put your franchise in a bad situation. I honestly thought they could have done better with Russ. And I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, why would you say that? Well, if you think you have George Pickens and now you go with DK Metcalf, now you have a guy who can eat up that underneath stuff. Meanwhile, George Pickens, who this was an interesting graphic that they put up. 19% of his routes were flies, goes. And needless to say, when you got a guy like DK Metcalf who can go deep in his own right, but is capable of stretching the field and eating up that middle, intermediate, and short stuff, I honestly thought this would have been nasty to bring back. But the Steelers went in a totally different direction. I get it. The Steelers are not in the business of just making the playoffs. Well, it does kind of look like that's what they've been doing the last couple of seasons. And then you go and you're going for Aaron Rodgers when you could have taken Shedeur Sanders, possibly Jackson Dart, but I think ultimately what they're doing is they're waiting on Arch Manning. I think everybody knows that he's probably going to come next year, and I think the Steelers are playing for that. I mean, I think they're building up draft capital in order to do that. I know a lot of people are going to say, well, they gave up their second this year. I think the Steelers next year, this coming draft, I think they end up possibly giving away a first and possibly a lot of draft capital to get their guy. They're not that far defensively. They're not that far offensively. I think the Steelers were a team that they were just above middle of the road, as you guys know. They've been competitive, and they're continuously having win seasons under Mike Tomlin. But I think what it boiled down to is George Pickens is just too much to deal with, which just absolutely is crazy that the Cowboys were the team that came in and took this. But I'm going to talk about that on a separate show. But right now, I have to get with why the Steelers had to give up on Pickens. And for me, it's about, I think that deal with Seattle was not necessarily the end, but I do think it kind of was getting to that point. And I think ultimately there may have been a meeting there. There may have been some kind of ill will that happened that just pushed it into its totality. Or maybe the Cowboys finally gave them a deal that they were looking for. I know there were a lot of reports that the Steelers were shopping him, but they just were not getting the type of compensation that they were looking for. And maybe the Cowboys finally did inch closer to that type of compensation that they were ultimately looking for, and you just had to pounce on it. So what does this mean for the Steelers? Ultimately, you got quite a few young players, not many because they didn't have a lot of draft picks. But I don't see this team having very much to compete as far as the offense goes. You also got T.J. Watt, who's dealing with trying to make him happy contractually. We don't know if he's going to hold out. And this could be a situation where the Steelers, whom have been an organization that has been, top notch, the class, top of its class when it comes as an organization, how it's run. And now to see arguably one of its best players, talent-wise, leaving and being traded as such, it leaves you to wonder what next for the Steelers. Because I'll be honest with you, if with the quarterback situation in Cleveland, I don't see guys like T.J. Watt, as good as this defense of the Steelers is going to be. They're going to have to get turnovers left and right, and you can't depend on that every single week to get you by. They let Najee Harris walk. So And you've got DK Metcalf, but then you have uncertainty when it comes to Aaron Rodgers. And it goes back to that same old adage. You're dependent on a guy whom the Jets have said many a times, and many analysts, such as myself, have said, you got to show up to training camp. A lot of the reason why you were so rusty and the Jets lost their first couple of games is because you were rusty. And not to mention, you were coming off of a severe injury. A very, very bad injury that, you know, at the end of the day, you were saying it to coaches that, oh, they don't want me to play or this, that, and other. And then it comes out that it was you that didn't want to practice. Or it was you that didn't want to play in these preseason games. Dude, you got to. And I'm going to be honest with you, and the way you're acting right now with the Steelers, doing this and doing that, saying they're not going to do this, it's almost like if I'm the Steelers, I don't want any part of this. It was like when Cam Hayward came out and said either he's with us or he's not. That's basically a leader of this team that's been here, established himself as one of the leaders, saying, "Hey, dude, if I don't need a leader that's just gonna be here whenever. I don't need a mercenary." That's basically what he's saying. Either you're in or you in. And I totally get it. I would feel the same way if that were me. Because guess what? Cam Hayward's there to win. He ain't got many more of these he can suit up for. And I feel him. And I'm not even a Steelers fan. Steelers are probably one of my least favorite teams. But I understand when you get leaders that step up like that. I like Mike Tomlin, his winning ability, but there are things he does that I don't like because it seems like there are times when the Steelers get the breaks and yeah. But I love the way they coach. Run the ball, throw it deep. Now the question goes into who's going to be that guy? Are you going to be running DK Metcalf 19% of these routes going deep? Not that he can't, because he's way faster than Pickens was, and that's what shocked me with Pickens. Pickens was still able to get open, but yet his numbers show he ran a 4.47 40. Now I'm like, and we know Metcalf can fly. But I just thought the whole process of allowing Fields and Wilson to walk and then leave yourself in a stranded position with no quarterback except Mason Rudolph, and we've already seen that play out. I would say, now this is just me, I would have said, and coming into what the Cowboys did, this trade should have went down about a week ago. If you guys remember, a week or two ago. I can't remember when exactly it happened. But the Cowboys still had Trey Lance. A lot of you are going to say, oh, Trey Lance is just like Jordan Love was. Many of you are going to say, Jordan Love, I knew he was that. No, you didn't. I knew he was going to be a decent player if he got the right shot. But the problem was we only saw him in a couple of games. We saw him at the tail end. I think it was the last season of Aaron Rodgers. And then everybody was like, oh, snap, what is going to happen? And then all of a sudden, the first couple of games, he wasn't doing very well. And then he just took off. I remember my fantasy league, nobody had him. Guess who stole him? Because I had a feeling this dude was going to do something eventually. And once he got comfortable, once he got comfortable with what Matt LaFleur was doing, and LaFleur deserves a lot of credit for that. But here's the other take that I look at. You got Trey Lance. You got Malik Willis, who's performed well at times. You've got these two guys that are floating around out there. Now, if you're the Steelers and you want to continue to be this organization that's reloading and not rebuilding, you need to take one of these guys. I would say you should have kept Pickens and went with Malik Willis. And see, now you're in a situation. Well, let me tell you why I say Malik Willis is because Malik Willis has a big arm. And there's been many, since Pickens has been in the league, he's never been overthrown. Well, he's hardly ever been overthrown. Malik Willis presents you a different dynamic with this because the guy's got a cannon for an arm. A lot of times Pickens has guys beaten by 4 or 5 yards and he still has to go up and play jump ball. Not that he can't do this, but when you, as a receiver, when you beat a guy deep, the last thing you want to have to do if you've already beat him is then turn around and beat him again. I mean, does that make sense? If you've ever beaten a guy, the last thing you want to do is have to beat him twice. You know, you have to beat him running, you have to beat him in the foot race, and then turn around and you have to beat him going up and getting the football. Now, I get it. The ball's got to be accurate. That was the one thing I thought Russell Wilson did such a phenomenal job with, is just throwing the ball deep. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, he couldn't do everything else. A lot of that was not on Russ. The offensive line for Pittsburgh was suspect at best. Just watch the Cleveland game. But where this leaves the Pittsburgh Steelers, it does not leave them in a very good position. As I said, I mean, Pickens is a home run threat. You know, and that's not something you can just really, just find around the corner. And to me, he was on the same level as, you're about to hear it, T. Higgins.
What the
Yeah. And he was great run after the catch because he was so big. Nobody wants to tackle a guy that's 6'4", weighs 215, 20 pounds. Nobody wants to deal with that. But I just say I think this is preparation to prelude to draft Arch Manning. And I know a lot of Steelers fans are not going to be happy, but that's what I think the trade of George Pickens basically illustrates. And it's going to be a changing of guard. I think they draft Arch Manning, and then they turn around and they take probably the best wide receiver in next year's draft. I ultimately think that the Steelers do have a lot of their major pieces in place. They do not, however, have a quarterback, and they do not have a number two. And I would argue, before we go, guys, I would argue that George Pickens is a 1B. He's just good enough. But let me know what you guys think. Do you guys think this was a desperate move by the Pittsburgh Steelers? Do you think it's the end of an era? Do you think this is going to be a catalyst for Pittsburgh's winning season? Or do you think this is just another, do you, like me, think this is going to be a situation where the Steelers are just, leveling up for draft picks next season? But make sure you leave your name down in the comments. If you join the family, make sure you guys also make good, clean comments. Give me insight if you think this is a calculated move by the Steelers, or you think it was just them getting rid of George Pickens. Do you like George Pickens? As well as, do you think Dallas benefited from this trade? Because I'm going to get into that on the next show. Till the next time, same Gab channel, same Gab platform.